Hey, it's Father Michael. So this morning, Timothy and I are going to walk through how to prepare the altar during the offertory for Holy Communion so that our epistle acolytes and other acolytes can get competent at preparing most of the table apart from what only the celebrant can do during the offertory for times when the priest is doing something else so that we can get the offertory set up in a timely fashion. Okay, so the first thing is that when the homily is completed and the celebrant has finished his sermon, then the sentences are given to the congregation that it is more blessed to give than to receive. That signals the beginning of the offertory. So that's at the point where I, as the parish priest, but also celebrant and choir member, go back to the choir. So when I give the offering sentences, it is more blessed to give than to receive, that triggers the acolyte, the epistle acolyte, to then get up and prepare. And both epistle acolytes will be involved in setting up the Holy Table. All right, so we have Timothy here. Timothy's standing at the epistle side of the station, and you see, of course, the credence table. Credence table comes from credo table, which is a belief. So what is placed on the credence table, and you'll also see the alms basin, in a sense, is we're offering these things in faith to God. So we have the lavabo towel, the lavabo bowl, all right? And then we have, next to that, we have what's called the bread box, and Timothy's going to open that for us. And that's typically where you're going to have the excess hosts that are unconsecrated. And then we have the wine and the water here, okay? So that's the credence table. So we've looked at the credence table. Now we're looking at the altar. In our parish, the stack, is kind of what we call it, the Eucharistic stack, is already set before the service begins. So it's not brought from the table and placed in an offertory. It's already on the table. So what you have here, I'm gonna show you how, as I dismantle it and take it down, I'll explain what the pieces are as well. So first you have the burse, which is on top. And notice the construction of how it's set up. It has the shape of a temple, which of course, that's the point. But the burse here, inside the burse, is often extra purificators. So there's at least 2 purificators, sometimes 3, that'll be set. So the first thing you do is take this down, take your purificators and set them here, and then I typically will put the burse right there against the back shelf under the candelabra. Then we have the veil. The veil is set. Sometimes the veil will be placed like this. The altar guild sometimes alternates how they arrange it, but that's the next thing you take off. So you just very easily remove it. Notice how I've kept the fold, and then I fold it as such, place it here. Now you're going to see why I folded it like that when we go back to rebuild it, because I'm mindful of how I laid it down, knowing that I'm going to have to pick it back up and then veil the chalice once we're completed with communion, but we'll get back to that. Okay, next we have the pall. So the pall is the next piece. This is what the pall is. So notice how we went soft materials, soft, hard, soft, hard. But this is the pall. I placed the pall here. Then you have the paten. So the paten has what the priest will consume. It's the priest hosts. So now we're at the point where we need to arrange the dishes, so to speak. So the paten goes in the center. I will then place the second chalice, because we have a second chalice when we have 2 chalice bearers. To the side here, I'll put the other main chalice on this corner, and I'll take this and hold it in my hand and take another purificator and cover the priest host. Okay? So notice where we're at this stage. We've got the priest, the paten center covered, chalice, ciborium, which is where the majority of the hosts to be consecrated are. There's typically a number on a piece of paper inside there, and we'll get to that in a second. But this is where your hosts are to be communed, and then your primary chalice. Okay, so now that we've gotten the altar to this stage, as we've already done, the next thing is that the epistle acolyte who's setting up is going to make sure we have the right amount of hosts necessary for the number of people in attendance. So in the ciborium, as Timothy's just held the lid up, there's typically 80 hosts in there, but there's always a little piece of paper with a number on it. Okay, so let's pretend that we actually have, how many do we have?
80.
Okay, so let's pretend we have 90 people. Okay, the usher gives 90 people as the count. Then the other acolyte would bring the bread box and hand it to the other epistle acolyte. And the other epistle acolyte is going to take 10 or so and add them to the ciborium. So we go from 80 to 90. It's pretty simple. Once he's completed that, he then hands it back to the other acolyte, nodding to complete, and then the bread box is put back. Then the next thing, after the bread has been adequately filled in the ciborium, the epistle acolytes need to make sure we have wine. So you would take the wine, the acolyte would bring it, you would nod, concluding and passing. Then, now I'm going to show Timothy how we do this. Okay, Timothy. So what you do is you take one of the purificators in the other hand, and you kind of just cover or shroud just so it doesn't splash. And you pour the wine into about half full, and then you wipe it, and you wipe the what are those called?
The carrot.
Yeah, you wipe that, and then you do the same. And basically what you're doing is you just want to be able to simply put half of the wine in basically each of the chalices. Once you're completed with that, he's going to put the purificator down, and he's going to hand the wine to the other acolyte. Of course, they nod, and then the other acolyte places it back in the tray. So, just to recap, at the conclusion of the wine, there you go, Timothy, excellent, you put the pall over the tall chalice. So what we've just done now, the second part, is that we've made sure that enough hosts are in the ciborium on the altar to make sure we have enough for the people that are in attendance, and that number comes from the ushers. And remember, I like to have, if they say 90, I put in a little bit more than 90, because you're better off to have more than less. After you've got the ciborium with the right amount, then the epistle acolyte takes the wine, he hands it back to the other epistle acolyte. That wine is poured equally amongst both chalices, wiping it, making sure nothing spills. The pall is set on top of the tall chalice, and then the wine is placed back on the credence table. So now we're basically at part 3. So everything is set as far as it can go on the altar by both of the epistle acolytes. The epistler acolyte who set the table is now, after that, standing at his station. The choir anthem concludes, and then the celebrant, if he's singing in the choir, will come back up to the altar. And basically what needs to happen at this point is to just make sure I'll make sure everything is set the way that it should be. And then I'll turn, because the last thing we need to do is to be abluted. So the ablution has to happen. So the water is taken into hand, the towel is placed on the arm and the lavabo bowl, as we normally do. So you put the towel over your left arm or whatever, right arm, whatever handed you are. You see how Timothy has the lavabo bowl in one hand and the water in the other. And then you come to the priest, and the priest will then put his hands over the water and wash away my sins, O Lord. And then wipe the towel. Then, of course, the nod. And then that concludes the offertory setup, and the priest turns then to receive the offering. We're now going to have Timothy walk through the process of preparing everything up through the major first two steps as our final piece of this video.